But collective consciousness, which is a Jungian term, really, what is collective consciousness? It is what you see on the television news or in the newspapers. It's that level. And it's way below the consciousness of any particular individual, which always happens when something goes collective. But what is it most that people fear? Well, it's the unknown, but what is this unknown? And it's quite easy to find out what is not known. You know. And it has an effect. And the anxiety of modern times and the angst of the 20th century and nihilism and all the negative expressions, I mean even modern art, which has exploded and very often ugly and is designed to shock very often, is because there's something missing. Something has been lost. And
or misunderstood or not understood.
Yes, of course, all of that as well, but something is lost, and that is the meaning of life. If life is meaningful, then people live it quite easily. And the trouble is that people grasp at things to be meaningful, and we're able to make things meaningful for a while. But it doesn't last. But the real meaningfulness of life, what is that? And people have lost that, and they have to find it again. And they can't. I would say we've got to a stage now where it cannot be taught. It cannot be told. It has to be discovered individually. I don't know, that sounds rather harsh, and everybody would like me to say. And I could say, but in this few minutes of time, I'm not about to say it for some reason. Perhaps you have to ask more questions, and it comes out more naturally.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that today, what are people living for, and what is the God? What is the main thing of interest? And I mean, it's quite well known, people have talked about it for years, we're a materialistic age. Really meaning that we want things and we want money. Not necessarily for its own sake. Now this is a collective thing, and not every individual is like that. And I'm speaking psychologically, not moralistically, not judgmentally, in that sense of saying those people are wrong. That's what we have, and that's what we have to come to terms with. But that doesn't, to spend your life making money, or to spend your life being a lawyer or a teacher or a political activist, is not the meaning of life. And all those activities, if you can find the connection to the real core, what's really important, okay, then they would be meaningful. But so many people are a bit in despair about what they're really doing.
Their despair is fully justified, isn't it? There really isn't any meaning, as you said, in those worldly things.
Well, you see, it's difficult, because if it's only a matter of doubt about something, and you set to work on it and say, now what's this doubt about? What's missing? Can I find it? And start looking about, then you keep living, you keep growing, you keep discovering. But if it turns into despair, and we don't quite know why it does, but it can in some people, and they give up. It strikes me on the simplest level, it might sound horrible, but I think the suicide terrorists, although it's acted out in a negative way, what they're doing is enormously meaningful to them. In the West, it's talked about, you know, the greatest thing is to give up your life for another. I mean, you hear it every Anzac Day, I think. Well, these people do. Now, but if you look further, why do they do that? Something has gripped them. It is worth doing this for a cause. But in the end, it's just destruction. So it doesn't work out. But all these things are rather interesting to look at and say, well, why are those people prepared to do it when I'm not prepared to go and do it? I won't die for a cause. And there's not many in the West who will. I mean, if you're in the army, you might have to sacrifice yourself, and I honour all those people who've done that. But that wasn't an individual thing. It was much more a collective thing. And of course it had to be done, but I don't know if I got off the tracks.
No, not at all. So, in our, because the Western rational materialism, it's not just we are in the West and we have a problem. This is something that is perceived as the truth, the way, and it has to be imposed on lesser philosophies, lesser economies, lesser religions, lesser viewpoints, because it's that. To me, this is a deep philosophical collective problem of the West, that it genuinely thinks it's inferior, it's superior, and it
that little slip.
Yeah.
You see, that they know it's the other way around. The West feels itself inferior, and therefore, because it's afraid of itself, it makes itself out to be superior. But the thing is, if you look at it from the other side, is that so much of the world that is not the West wants what the West has got. So it's a two-way thing, or it's a very enmeshed thing. And the whole thing is very turbulent. Now, since the Middle Ages, since the West set out on its journeys of exploration, since about the 12th century, there's been all this turmoil going on. And where we are now is at the end of 1,000 years of change in the world. We're also at the beginning of the next 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever years. And if you look at these historical things, not just at the politics of it, but everything else that's going on, and in a psychological sense, as Jung understood it, then you find that there are great movements that take many thousands of years to develop and to happen. And we're in that. So this moment in time is a blip in time, but it's vitally important what we do about what we have inherited and where we go, and so on. But this gets into rather rarefied areas, and the individual says, well, what can I do about it? And it can be overwhelming, and you can say, well, I can't do anything about it on the grand scale, but what I can do is to be as conscious as possible, and as discriminating and understanding, and evaluating about the situation, because that might help collective consciousness. And this was Jung's great hope, that if enough people could become conscious, then the world would not destroy itself. Now the fact is that the world hasn't destroyed itself. Does that mean enough people have become conscious? You can't, it doesn't prove anything, but it's an interesting idea.
It's a hopeful
and
idea.
Obviously it doesn't take very many people to become conscious, to save a situation. Because it does seem to have an effect, both on collective consciousness, and the leaders are only leading collective consciousness. But it also has an effect on the unconscious. The unconscious is not conscious. Consciousness is in us. See, this is the remarkable phenomenon. This is, to me, what makes life meaningful. That we have the least power compared with the unconscious. Psychic diseases, madnesses like the Second World War, like Nazism, that can sweep whole nations and then, make the whole world into a conflagration, almost. That's the raw power of the psyche. When it affects a few individuals, but then it infects a whole nation, a whole world even. And what can you do against it? But the thing is that it's only the human, the individual, that can do something about it.
So, if I'm just trying to clarify that point, if, as we were talking before, I felt when you were talking about the, as you called, the rarefied atmosphere of the hugeness of humanity in that collective thing, I felt some anxiety there, because I think, you know, something that is inherently totally out of our control, which is humanity as a whole, or the nation as a whole, we feel quite anxious about that. Well, I do, and I dare say I'm not the only one. And then, as you kept talking, you said, well, this is very rarefied, and what can the individual do? And I think that was very important to follow that statement up with what can the individual do. Otherwise, you're leaving people in a state of helplessness and fear. And so Jung came through with a very positive affirmation that the individual, by coming to terms with their own shadow as much as they can, and accepting that, will help the collective situation. And in fact, that's the only thing the individual can do anyway, but it is effective. Much more effective than we might like to imagine.
Well, it's the greatest political activity that any individual can undertake.
It is to
become aware of one's own shadow and integrate it into oneself.
Yes.
You know, I don't think the greatest political activity is to go and change the world, change our society, change the DPB and all those things. They're little things. That's like housekeeping. They're not the important thing. But it comes through the individual dealing with their own shadow or coming to understand it. But of course it doesn't stop there. But it can't really be explained.
No.
You know?
But it might not be explainable, but somehow I have a...
It can be lived. It can be experienced.
Yes.
It's just that it can't really be explained to another person.
No.
Because then it sounds mystical, and that's the one thing that Jung wasn't. He was not a mystic, as it's normally understood in a negative sense. Because he experienced everything he talked about, he had experienced. Or it was based on experience.
And surely experience is proof? Certainly one's own personal experience can be proof. Because
well, I don't know. I don't think it's proof, but it's valid. It has a validity. If you have actually done something, then you have done it. I mean, no one can take that from you. Whether you've understood it or not is another matter. But the experience is valid. And how you understand it is another thing. But that brings in this whole UFO phenomenon and alien abductions and so on and so forth. Now, if you take that experience concretely, you get one answer, that there are aliens and they're trying to do nasty things to us. If you take it on a mythological level, take it as a vision or a dream, which they are, then your understanding is rather different. There's something from outside that wants us, is interested in us. And in fact, with the alien abductions, it means that this something from outside is impregnating you. That is, something new is being created, and you are necessary to it. This thing cannot be produced without the human individual. But it's not understood in that sense. So it becomes something of fear.
Well,
and we're being invaded and they want to take us over. No, they want to produce something new. And we don't know what the new thing is. So that's fearful too.
Well, I want to leap in here because I
Yes.
think this is a crucial way of understanding Jung's message, and that is that he had visions, he had dreams, he witnessed glasses spontaneously disintegrating, you know, things like that. Now, my point is, the difference with Jung was that he didn't identify those occurrences with with his personal ego. And what he said was that these things that happen, I don't think I caused that, or that that was a literal thing involving me, and to which I actually contributed in a direct way. He called that inflation, didn't he? He said when the person identifies with their unconscious, all that huge energy in the unconscious, in the psyche, and when they identify with that, even though they don't know what it is, and then they are inflated. They have got it all wrong. They've got it out of perspective. That they are identifying the collective, those thousands of years of collective history and knowledge and wisdom, as if they personally had it. And that inflates them and causes them and a lot of people around them great danger. And that's why it's important to, when you have a dream, when you have a vision, when you have a feeling of truth, when you have any personal experience like that, to have an understanding of the psyche as a complex thing, and to not simply identify that concretely and simplistically and childishly as as your energy, but to understand that, as you said, you were small, that experience was big, and not to act out of that experience as if you had all that personal energy. Now, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I think Jung was humble in that sense. He was humble in front of the psyche. He didn't say that's all mine.
Well, the thing is that it is one's at the same time. You see, these things are ultimately paradoxical.
Yes.
As I said before, talking about the self, with a capital S, the greater personality that we also are. So we are an ego, but we can also be a self, but not confuse the two. And now this is at the nub of what you were talking about. When this matter of inflation, or being, the old term is being possessed by something. A person has a good idea, they are possessed by the good idea. They're being possessed by the archetype of that idea, whatever that is. And it can manifest in all sorts of ways. It can be positive and it can be negative. Now, somewhere Jung says that we would never do anything unless we got an inflation. So inflation itself is not negative, necessarily. But to go back to what happened with Jung, how come he brought a new understanding? That's important. He started off, he was a psychiatrist, working in the Burkholzli in Zurich, the main mental, what we would have called an asylum, but the Europeans, being civilized, called it a clinic. Working with psychotic people, incurable people. And he suddenly, for some reason, found that they were interesting, and that the stories they had to tell were interesting, and that the stories actually seemed to have a meaningfulness or a sense in them. But the trouble was that these people who had the story, their ego consciousness was not strong enough. They could not withstand the experience, and they went mad. They could not hold it together. And so that everybody who went to consult Jung as a doctor would tell him their story, and he would come down to their level and accept their story as meaningful, not as pathological. And that was how he cured. He didn't do anything, he just listened. And there's the story, one lady was sent by I think a pastor from the centre of Switzerland, a young girl who was a bit crazy. And she came to see Jung, and he sang her a lullaby. And she went away and was cured. I tell the story wrongly, because Jung met the person who had referred him and said, "What on earth did you do? A miraculous cure on that young girl?" Jung said, "I did nothing, I just sang her a lullaby." Because he knew that's what she needed. to cure her, extraordinarily. Now, there were people who never forgave Jung for curing them from their madness. There was the famous story of the lady who lived on the moon. Her fantasies were so strong, and that was the reality. And Jung accepted it as a reality, and that broke the possession, if you like. And she could, after that, no longer live on the moon, which had been wonderful, the whole life, whole fantasy life. And Jung accepted her story, her fantasies as reality, and that depossessed them of their power, and she had to come and live in this world, and she hated him for it. So, what am I talking about? This whole idea of being possessed and being inflated. To live in the real world is hard. It's hard work. To live in the fantasy world is easy, relatively speaking. But it doesn't contribute anything to this world. And this world is going to go on. Let's agree to that. It's not going to destroy itself. It's going to go on. And it's not going to get any easier. The challenges are only going to get greater, I think. But one of the most powerful archetypes is the archetype of the golden age, of paradise. The golden age that was once wonderful and will again be wonderful. And this is behind all the ideas of utopia, all the idealistic, and that we can wipe out evil from the world and get rid of terrorists. It's all part of the same powerful archetype, which makes human beings dependent on some other entity that will make everything all right. And whether you consider it to be the Father God or the Great Mother who's going to look after you and it will be all right, it's not reality, but it's a powerful idea, powerful archetype. And I think we have to stand up and say no to that. And that's what I learned through my analysis and through understanding Jung and then the world. That this is where we are. This is what we're here for. To live this life, not another life, not an ideal life, but this life. And that we are the ones, human beings, are the ones that have this knowledge and this ability. You see, not the unconscious necessarily, but you see, the unconscious wants us to succeed and doesn't want us to at the same time. It's the basic paradox. It's the yay and the nay. And that's, you see, this is a religious attitude to life. What Jung developed, his attitude to life is a religious attitude. It doesn't mean that you become religious or follow a creed or a sect or believe in what you're supposed to. But it's the same thing that is spoken of in those religions. Like the myth of paradise and what is it? The fall, the sin, the eating of the fruit. Eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. It's humans who have that knowledge. That's the important thing, and what we do with that knowledge is the important thing.
And that banned them from paradise.
Yes.
Ignorance was paradise.
Yes, because it was all good, but they became aware that there was another side, that there were two sides, and that therefore they could not stay in the good state. And that's what we are. We have to deal with the good and the bad, or all the pairs of opposites.
Therefore, as Jung said, consciousness is a tremendous burden, and by far not everybody wants to shoulder that burden. They would rather perhaps be unconscious.
Well, some of us are not strong enough to carry it, and that's why we have the collective, because it carries it for us. We don't have to be so responsible, and that's okay. You see, it's an individual thing, and this is, you can't teach it in schools and universities and so on and so forth. But if the individual wants to be conscious, then they must become conscious, or they get destroyed. But
when they do, they're caught between a rock and a hard place, because consciousness...
No, something else happens at that point.
But when they do, as you pointed out, with Jesus Christ suspended between two opposites, caught in the middle, that as a metaphor of the way life is, there is no goodness that you can finally go into and completely relax. That life is full of tension, full of paradox.
No, you can go into goodness and relax.
Yes,
that's what a lot of people do, and they go into evil and they relax there and have a wonderful time. But our time, in the last 2,000 years, that image of the crucifixion, Christ crucified between the two thieves, one goes up to heaven, the other goes down to hell, and even the hanging on the cross, suspension between the opposites. We're still in that. We still have to deal with it. But that will evolve. This is the problem with all the evangelicals and fundamentalists and so on, is that they say it's only one thing and we know what that one thing is and it will never change. Well, history and the history of religions, and you know that someone wrote a history of heaven, and God has a history. All those ideas have a history and they have all changed and are changing. They're dynamic, and the gods die, and then they come up again. Of course, you can never kill them, but they die in that form.
Yeah.
Then they come up in another form. But we live in this moment. We don't live at the beginning, and we don't live at the end. Now, a lot of people want this to be the end. And so they get ready, and they predict that the end of the world is coming this particular day, and they kill themselves. And then they're going to be taken off, those people in California who were going to go and meet the spaceship behind the moon, so because that was the end of the world. And people can live these things, but what does it contribute to life? What does it contribute to the advancement of the continuation of life? Yeah, but if we wish to, we can join in and we can become responsible. And not think that we're sinful because we have the knowledge of good and evil. That's a fact. We can't do anything about it. We have fallen.
Accept it.
Accept it and then see what you can make of it.
Yeah.